Lessons Learned, a show where we talk about the good, the bad, and the lessons in between. I'm your host, Captain Alyssa Hinckley, and this is Lessons Learned. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4. Of course, as many of us are back in a virtual world, so are we here in the Wyoming Military Department. So not joining me in the studio, but joining me virtually is Captain Tim Tierney and First Sergeant Joshua Phillips. Welcome to the show. Glad to both have you on.
Thanks for having us, ma'am.
All right, let's get started. Giving our listeners a quick background on both of you. We'll kick it off with Captain Tierney. Receiving his commission in the Wyoming National Guard in 2014, Captain Tim Tierney has served a variety of positions, including S1 for the 2300th, platoon leader for Bravo Battery, and operations officer for Bravo Battery, then most recently commanding the forward deployed Charlie Battery. He currently serves as the commander for Bravo Battery 2300th Field Artillery located in Lander, Wyoming, and on the full-time side as an action officer at Northern Command in Colorado Springs in the Joint Training and Exercises Directorate. He graduated from the University of Portland with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. We'll now go to First Sergeant Joshua Phillips. He entered the Wyoming National Guard in 1996 and has since held numerous assignments, including cannoneer with Alpha Battery, 3rd of the 49th Field Artillery, prime mover, driver, gunner, ammo team chief, and supply sergeant with Bravo Battery. He deployed in 2006 with the 2nd and 300th Field Artillery in support of Iraqi freedom, again in 2009 to 2010 with Headquarters and Headquarters Battery 2300th in support of Iraqi freedom, and most recently deployed with Charlie Battery as the first sergeant from 2019 to 2020. He currently works full-time as the S4 NCO for the 115th Field Artillery Brigade and continues to serve as a first sergeant for Bravo Battery. And as always, our listeners know this is just a very, very brief snippet of each of your careers. Much more experience packed in there, so let's dial it back. And I'll start off with asking, why did you join in the first place? First Sergeant Phillips, we'll start with you.
Well, ma'am, I first got interested in the military when I was in high school. I actually was going to join the Marines at first, but then I got smart and had a National Guard recruiter come in and talk to me. And what really got me interested in the National Guard was the being able to support the state and the people within it, and not just totally military side of the house. The concept of being able to support flood missions or anything like that and work within the state is what really got me interested in the National Guard.
Awesome. And what about you, Captain Tierney?
Well, I originally wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. So I love the camaraderie of high school sports and lifelong relationships that I got from them. Joining the military was the closest thing to getting that feeling of camaraderie, since my less than remarkable athleticism wouldn't cut it in professional sports. So I decided to join the Air Force as a cryptographer in the delayed entry program my first semester of senior year of high school. And then over the course of my senior year, I was offered a federal scholarship from the Army, which was a no-brainer for me. This was in 2009 with the Iraq war surge, and I romanticized the idea of being able to lead soldiers in a combat zone upon graduating college in 2013. And then things changed drastically when I was in college, and I ended up graduating during the height of sequestration, which was the polar opposite environment from which I was recruited. But still, 6 years later, I was able to deploy, and I got a better sense of that camaraderie that I was looking for, being around my soldiers all day, every day, for 11 months, working towards a common mission. So I still serve today with wanting to serve with a sense of camaraderie, and that's one of the biggest driving factors for me staying in.
So it sounds like both of you guys originally started on different paths to different services, but got smart and joined the Guard. So that's pretty interesting. First Sergeant Phillips, this is a question for you. You've served for, well, I don't want to tell you how old I was in 1996, but you've served for quite a few years now in a variety of different positions, leading soldiers. What's been your favorite position so far?
Well, ma'am, I'd have to say my favorite position right now is actually being a first sergeant. So coming up through the ranks and everything like that, I've always saw what a first sergeant got to do, and it was being with the soldiers, leading them, mentorship, and everything like that. And that's what I always wanted to do. And when I hit that goal, being able to interact with the soldiers, mentor the soldiers, learn from the soldiers, being a first sergeant is my favorite position.
We'll bounce it over to Captain Tierney. In your breadth of experience, what have you found most enjoyable about the positions you've held?
Right. So my favorite position has been platoon leader with Bravo Battery. It was this position that I knew all of my soldiers well, and it was just awesome when we're out doing field exercises. It's a great feeling when you're on a road in the North training area with your whole platoon. You get on the radio and tell all the platoon elements to release, and then they go off on the road to go find their hide positions. It's almost like a grown-up game of hide and seek, where you're simulating a conflict in which your ability to hide and move quickly is your ability to survive. So as a platoon leader, once you have set up your platoon operations center, you go and try to find the launchers by looking for matted grass coming off a road or other signs like that. If you find the launcher crew, they lose. So I love being a commander, but I don't get the same interaction with my soldiers as I did as a platoon leader. It was a lot of fun.
What were some of the crucial, from the now being a commander standpoint, and then looking back on your platoon time, what would you say some of those crucial lessons that you learned as you're, being a lieutenant, being a platoon leader, that made you into the commander that you are now?
I think first and foremost, it's taking care of soldiers. So you learn that early on as a leader in the Wyoming Guard is, hey, if you take care of soldiers, if they know the mission, they're going to take care of the mission. So you got to really be clear with the mission, give them their left and right limits, and empower your NCOs to take care of business. And that's really translated well as commander. So, yeah.
Yeah, I often hear that, our job as officers or our job as senior NCOs is to take care of soldiers, right? You hear that all the time. People, it's always like, well, my job is take care of soldiers. Do one of you want to take on elaborating on what that means to you? I think it's kind of a blanket statement of, yeah, as long as you take care of soldiers, you're doing your job. But what does that truly mean to you as a commander, as a first sergeant? How do you take care of soldiers, and what does it mean?
Well, ma'am, I'll take that one on at first, and then I'll let the commander talk. But taking care of soldiers, so you're right. It is used as a blanket statement quite a bit. But as myself and working with Captain Tierney and throughout the years, what that really entails is it's not just looking out for your soldiers while you have them at drill. It's getting to know your soldiers to a certain point and learning their background, if they're married, if they have kids, stuff like that, where they feel comfortable that they can reach out to you if there's an issue. It's not just on the military side. It's on the personal side, too, to a certain moment, because with the National Guard, we're unique. We get to train with these guys for a very long time. Some of us might have grown up with the soldiers that we're leading. And it comes to education, it comes to finances, it comes to possibly at 2:00 in the morning, you got a soldier calling you, and you wake up and you take the time, wipe your eyes off, and you listen to them, and that goes a long ways. And it's about respect, and it's a two-way. It's just a two-way street. You take care of them, and they take care of us, because we could not do what we do as a command team without our soldiers. And if we show that we will back our soldiers 100% when they're in the right, they will bend over backwards to make sure that we meet the mission and they do what we ask them. So it's a very big concept, and it's growing. It's just not a black and white answer.
Right. Yeah, that's a good perspective on that. So what do you when at the end of drill, what do you look to say, I successfully, for those other first sergeants out there, those people who want to be first sergeants, how do you feel that you have succeeded in that? What are the kind of the markers behind that?
Some of the markers that I get on that, ma'am, is actually if I could just sit down with just at least one soldier. If I have one soldier that comes up to me and says, hey, First Sergeant, I need to talk. Mm-hmm. And we have, if it's solving an issue or if they want to come up and they have an idea of moving to a different position or matter of fact, not last drill, but the last drill we had in Guernsey, I had some soldiers come up to me and they wanted to develop a smart book. A little smart book you carry in your pocket, out in the field and everything like that. And they brought that to me, and I told them, I said, develop one. I said, don't ask permission. I said, develop one, bring it to me, and we will move forward with it. It's a great idea. And that just those moments throughout drill, even if I get one, that's a one-on-one mentorship time with that soldier. And I know that soldier will carry it on to the soldiers that they work with. Mm-hmm. So just one of those conversations like that is a win for me during drill.
Captain Tierney, do you have anything to kind of go off of what First Sergeant Phillips is saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I could give a case example from our last deployment with taking care of soldiers. So when you're deployed, you'll from time to time receive Red Cross messages that are very important for the soldier. It could be terminal illness in the immediate family or birth of a child that's upcoming. So we had numerous Red Cross messages come through, and basically your job as commander is to understand and have that balance between the mission and the soldier. So whatever is happening for the mission at that point in time, if it's steady state operations where you can kind of allow that soldier to go see the birth of that child, that's absolutely something that we did on the deployment. So we had 5 soldiers that had childbirth back in the States. Wow. And we got all of them back to the United States. And that took significant bandwidth from both myself, First Sergeant, and some of our NCOs. Mm-hmm. But we're able to make it happen. They all got home and they were able to see the birth of their child. I mean, we had one guy that was on the border of Syria, and we were able to get him out of that location into the United States within 30 hours. And that was pretty good considering our constrained transportation resources over there.
Yeah. Wow. So let's kind of change a little bit. I mean, I guess not really changing gears, but the M-Day side of things is one thing. There presents some pretty difficult opportunity to take care of soldiers or to be around soldiers or to really influence soldiers. On the 1 week in a month side, you two spent your time together overseas in active duty status. So can you talk about some of the lessons maybe you learned that are separate from the experience some first sergeants and commanders have on the M-Day side? What are some different lessons that you maybe learned overseas that we can apply back home?
Well, ma'am, I'd have to say one of the biggest lessons that I learned and biggest takeaway is in that capacity full time during the deployment is as a command team. And I know as a first sergeant, even if the mission was complete for the day, you're never off. There was many a times that I would get a call or nudged in the middle of the night because a soldier had an issue or something came up. So that was the biggest thing is you're just not really, as first sergeant, you're not really ever off for the day, if that makes sense. Yeah. And really you become a mentor. You're not really an SME in anything that the crews are doing. You're really there for guidance and leadership. That was the biggest takeaway I got is I didn't really have a specific job except to make sure that the soldiers were okay. I'd go out and talk to them, do some PMCS with them. And that was the biggest thing is go out there and get your hands dirty with them. And you could really spark up some conversations where you're greasing a Humvee with a soldier. And they would see that. And it's just the interaction with them pretty much 24/7 that I thought was very good. And you actually got to learn a lot about your soldiers and the issues. And it really helped me self-reflect on some of my leadership skills.
That's very interesting. Is that something that, you bring back now to the M-Day side? Is that something that you're noticing is a lot more difficult to be back here in the United States, don't have that face-to-face time with your soldiers? How is it different?
It's a whole lot different because, we try to pack as much training as we can into a weekend. So it's really, you're going 100 miles an hour and you don't get a lot of downtime with your soldiers like you would on a deployment. So it is a lot more difficult, but you've got to still take the time. And the advice that I would give out to the first sergeants, the same kind of advice I got, is even if it's 11 o'clock at night and you see a soldier walking around in their PTs and they're done, take 15 minutes to talk to them. But it is a lot more difficult to do because there is a lot more stuff for the command team that ties up their time. And usually you don't get done till you're 11 o'clock at night. But we still got to make that time to talk to them.
Captain Tierney, do you have anything on this point?
Yeah, so a couple of lessons learned from the deployment. Number one is sometimes you have to be able to make decisions without all the information at hand. And this is critically important, where the speed of the decision is more important than making a decision that could be, say, 20% better with all the information. I'll give you a case example here is during the Iranian theater ballistic missile attack, we only had a few hours to react. So there's a lot of information coming in. You didn't know what was accurate, what was not. But the speed of the decision was critically important because we're talking about potentially life or death decisions on that. So as a leader, you're taking that liability for the decision, and I've seen that liability cripple some leaders, and I call it the ostrich syndrome, where the decision is incredibly important, yet you don't have all the information, and so that decision isn't made, or that individual sticks their head in the sand. So you could also call it paralysis by analysis, and there is a time and a place for lengthy, deliberate decision making, and also a time and a place to make decisions that could save lives and or complete the mission by making a hasty decision. And that was one of the biggest takeaways from the deployment is it's critically important for leaders to make decisions and not to be frozen and indecisive. And really, it comes down to don't be afraid to make decisions as a leader. Hindsight's always 20/20 when it comes to decisions, because with hindsight you have all the information.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I find myself, I've never taken command. I've never really been in a crucial. I haven't done platoon time or anything like that, but I always find myself a little intimidated by the thought of being in that type of position where, it's like the crux of the decision making is on you. And it's a little intimidating to think of, what if I make the wrong decision, or what if I get scared and I can't make a decision? How have either of you navigated bad decisions from leaders in the past? So for Sergeant Phillips, with your experience, rising through the enlisted ranks, how have you dealt with your leaders and your chain of command maybe making a decision that wasn't something that you necessarily agreed with?
So in a situation like that, man, really, we've all experienced bad decisions throughout our career, where it maybe makes you scratch your head and stuff like that. But if you have leadership that happens to make that bad decision or something like that, and you got to move out and do it. So you direct your soldiers to go ahead and carry on with it. And then you pull that leader to the side, and I've done this several times, pull them to the side, sit down and have a good conversation with them, or a quick conversation, because you may not know, most of the time you don't know their side. So everyone's all like, oh, what the heck's going on? Why are they making that call? Well, that's when you got to really kind of step back and be like, all right, let's pull them to the side. Let's talk. Let's get all the facts, because that bad call, they might have made that same decision too with their supervisor, saying, hey, this doesn't make sense. Sometimes we just get handed that sandwich and we got to eat it. But if you really pull that leader to the side and say, hey, this may not have been the best way to do this, can we rethink this? And I've done that, and Sometimes it's really a 50-50. Sometimes it works, and they're like, you know what, First Sergeant, you're 100% correct. Go ahead and change that. Go ahead and push it out. And there's still time to push it out. It all depends, because I've never really come to a bad decision where it's actually been really critical to mission failure. There's always time to really kind of adapt to it. And that's where it really comes down to, is pulling that person that made the decision. Because I've made bad decisions myself. And I've had my platoon sergeants grab me and say, hey, First Sergeant, you're way off in left field. We need to rethink this. And it's just the time to talk to that supervisor, to that leader, and get their perspective too, because they might have been handed that sandwich too, and we just got to move out with it. So you got to kind of get both sides of the story before you just jump to that conclusion of, it was a total bad decision. But most of the time, you can really correct them.
Captain Tierney, do you have something for decision making?
Yeah. So unless an order is illegal, immoral, or unethical, really you got to stick by that order and execute it to the best of your ability. Now, before that happens, I'll maybe, if it's coming from a higher officer, I'll maybe try to show my side of the story and see if maybe that decision could be changed. If not, then you got to drive on. And at that point, it's about motivating others, motivating your soldiers to follow that order. And that's the difficult part. It's the messaging. So how do you get soldiers to do something that you don't yourself want to do? And that's really difficult. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're in the Army, and unless that order meets one of those three criteria, you gotta make it happen. So in those situations, you message it just the right way where you think the soldiers can execute, and then you go from there.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very interesting point about protecting morale of the force. So sometimes, the people in the battery, the company, the lower enlisted, they don't really understand the decision being made, and then it just kills morale. So how do you as a command team kind of protect the morale? And, you brought up messaging the decision to the force, but how do you drive on from that? Because, it's obviously not just one conversation where you say, this is a decision, let's drive on. So how do you protect the morale, increase the morale, and kind of shield the lower enlisted from getting, a negative attitude about the situation?
Well, ma'am, on that, really, as a command team, me and Captain Tierney, we've kind of really prided ourselves on informing the soldiers as much as possible. So, we give them the order on what's going on, and then we give them the why. Because we do have a younger generation of soldiers out there that ask why. And it doesn't take there's time and place for it. There is. And you'll see a lot of senior NCOs or officers say, well, why do we got to tell them that? It takes 5 minutes sometimes to tell them a why. And if you give them a why, that morale, for the most part, really stays up. And to shield the lower enlisted from some of the stuff that they don't need to know, Capt Tierney really did a great job as he would bring his platoon leaders in and platoon sergeants, and we'd have a discussion on what was coming down, and it was kind of a not really just strictly an order coming down from the commander. Captain Tierney got input from all the platoon leaders and platoon sergeants on the best way to deliver this. So it was really a joint process on what we needed to inform the soldiers of and how to keep that up. And Captain Tierney did a real good job on that. That's one thing I learned from him on how to bring that in there. And really, it's just keeping these guys informed on what the whole mission is and why we're doing it. That was the best technique I probably saw on keeping morale high.
Yeah. So for my part of the input on morale, so I think you can kind of see the writing on the wall for a lot of decisions that are going to be made. So if you can kind of be transparent as much as you can with your soldiers and to try to prepare them for what's going to come, I think when it actually does come, they're much more prepared, and it affects morale a lot less negatively when it does finally come down the line. Another thing too is just like First Sergeant was saying is how do you message it, and getting input from all your NCOs and your platoon leaders. That definitely helps, and maybe they can allow you to see something with a different perspective than what you were intending on doing. Then another thing too is having the right person make that statement. So First Sergeant usually was the talker for the unit. We would talk behind the scenes like, okay, this is how we're going to message this, and this is the why. And then he would go out and he would give that message to the soldiers, and generally it was received really well. They might not like the message, but they at least understood the why, and it made it so much easier on the deployment by using that approach.
That segues nicely into a good conversation topic about the relationship between the command relationship that you both have between the commander and the first sergeant. So you say, you would have First Sergeant Phillips be kind of the voice behind the decision. Let's talk a little bit about navigating the relationship, the command relationship, and how you guys are kind of work together to do the best for the battery.
Well, ma'am, I think we're honestly probably the best example that you could get, because with the deployment, we didn't start off the deployment as a command team. We kind of got promoted into the whole situation there. And before we even met face to face, Capt Tierney reached out to me and I reached out to him. And I got his command philosophy, and we had some good conversations over the phone. So when we actually got to meet up face to face, we weren't starting from square one. We kind of got the boundaries, and I kind of know what the commander was wanting, and really sitting down and talking to the commander, getting his left and right limits, his the mission he was wanting to do, what he's wanting to accomplish and everything like that. And he did the same thing with me. So building that great working relationship right there, right off the bat, and really learning how to read Captain Tierney and how he got to read me, because there's times that we would say something, I'd say something, he'd say something. We wouldn't even have to do anything, just a body thing. After everything was done, come back and be like, what did I do wrong, or what did you not like about that? Because you just got that relationship built like that, so you could read each other like that. And, bottom line is, as a first sergeant, I'm here to make sure that the commander's mission and his intent is met. And that's my main purpose, to get that accomplished and make sure that the soldiers know that, the platoon leaders know that, the platoon sergeants know that, and they got their left and right limits. And that it just worked out as a great relationship on that, because, he reached out to me right away, which was great, and we just really worked together.
So from my perspective, our relationship has been developed since mid-November of last year. So, and then half of that time was on the deployment together, the last 4.5 months. Our relationship is at such a level with our communication that I distinctly remember last drill, we were in a planning meeting, and First Sergeant just looked at me, and I knew exactly what he was thinking, and I just gave him a little nod, and then he asked that exact same question that we were both thinking. And it's just at that level where we've developed this over the past year, where we're oftentimes on the same wavelength. And then when we're not, we get together behind the scenes and we talk through it and figure out how to best go forward. Or with to the extent that we just use body language to talk at this point. So it's really good.
So you said that initially, you received contact and you guys have just been building that relationship. But what are some specific examples about how you build that? If you were to kind of help an up and coming first sergeant or an up and coming commander, what would you say? How do you how do you accomplish that? Not just we're on the same page, we're doing great, we can read each other, but how did you get to that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is to establish your expectations. So before First Sergeant hit ground from UAE into Kuwait, that week we were talking back and forth. I said, hey, here's my expectations. Here's my vision. Here's my initial counseling. And this is what I expect of you. Here's your left and right limits. I told him I want a First Sergeant that takes the initiative. And if you're taking the initiative and you're trying to stay in the left and right limits and you maybe err to the left or right a little bit too much, then I'll pull you in behind the scenes and we'll talk about that. But I definitely want you to take the initiative, get out there, be with the troops, and to have leadership in that regard. So and that's exactly what First Sergeant came in and did. I mean, he didn't know any of these soldiers, which is a very difficult situation to be in as a First Sergeant, because that's one of your main jobs, is to know these soldiers really well. So I think really to build that relationship, you start off with the expectations, and then you just let them have at it. And then if there's any errors or anything of that nature, then you talk to them behind the scenes, and then you get on that same page. And it takes time, but that communication is key to building that relationship.
First Sergeant, do you have anything to elaborate on that?
He hit it right on the nail right there, man.
All right. Awesome. So can either of you think of a time, right now you guys are standing on a point where this position that you're in is working somewhat cohesive, somewhat successful, but can you think of a time maybe in your career, early on in your career even, where maybe you thought you were failing, or maybe you thought that this is a career ender, this is detrimental to my career progression? Can either one of you elaborate on a time that maybe wasn't as successful and what you got from it and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I got a time for you, ma'am. So when it was time when I was in Bravo Battery and I was a new staff sergeant and I was a supply sergeant, just picked up AGR. And at that time, I was still fairly young and fairly immature. And I took my position at that time as just a paycheck. I didn't really have any honor in the position at the time. Like I said, I just took it as a paycheck. And we had a change of command come up. And I was at the time missing about $60,000 worth of equipment.
Yikes.
Yes, yikes was a very big thing. And when this was going on, I was actually at BNOC and got through that, came back, and I had a now retired Colonel Phillips and a couple of his staff come down to have counseling with me. And I was pretty sure I was probably going to get fired at that time. And they came in, and before we started off that meeting, I wanted to say something. So I asked them to say something. And I told them, I said, look, I have failed the organization. I have failed the unit. I have failed my commander. But I'm asking for 6 months to turn this around and show you what I can do as an NCO. Because I learned a lot at BNOC. And at that time, Master Sergeant Eisman, he's retired now, one of my mentors, stood up and looked at everybody and said, this meeting is over, and kicked them all out of the room. And they gave me a second chance, and now I'm here. But that moment in my career, I thought it was the end of my career. I thought I was done, and I knew I messed up. But I took the time to do a little bit of self-reflection and correct my mistakes. So that was one big moment right there where I felt a failure as an NCO.
And what have you now since? Have you ever led $60,000 of equipment? Since have you mended your ways, or do you take anything from that experience and apply it to now?
I have used that experience and that example to many soldiers, many new supply sergeants, and it really helped spark the conversation on how important everybody's job is in the unit and in this organization, and that even from a bad situation, you can take good away from it. Because now I know that that's not the NCO or the person or the soldier that I want to be. And now I gave soldiers an example of something that they don't want to be. So it was a good learning experience. So yeah, I've used that several times, and I still have that in the back of my head. So if I think my feet are dragging or something like that, I look that up and be like, you know what? I don't want to be like that again. So it was a very, very good and bad experience, if that makes sense, man.
Yeah, no, I oftentimes think that our failures are some of the best experiences we go through. As weird as that sounds, I look back on the things that I perceived as being a failure as being the most defining for who I am today. Sometimes it's as simple as, well, I'm never going to do that again. Or it's as simple as, that's not the type of person I want to be. So it's a very interesting perspective that you bring that's, you kind of lean on that experience. And you also tell people as kind of like, heed my warning, don't be the type of supply sergeant I was at one point in time. So that's interesting. And it's also good to keep in mind that, we're not defined by our failures, or we're not defined by our experiences, but we can learn and grow, and we can be better for it. So Captain Tierney, do you have any examples of some time that maybe you experienced some sort of failure but grew from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I fail all the time. So I've got some pretty extreme examples of failure. So I started off as a brand new second lieutenant, and within a few short months, I headed off to BOLIC at Fort Sill, Lawton, Oklahoma. And it came down to the line where we're taking our final exam for gunnery. And I ended up getting a 78 overall in gunnery, which at that point in time, you needed an 80 or better to pass BOLIC. And I was doing well in my other function. I had a 92, but that 78, I got, kicked out, and the instructor said, hey, I'll recommend for you to recycle. So I go back and I talked to, at the time, Colonel Cudney, the battalion commander, and I got my, my ears pinned down, my tail tucked between my legs. I just feel like a loser. And I was like, man, I got to get better somehow. So I did an internal AR, figured out what went wrong. I had a lot of things out of my control happen. So excluding those things, I figured out how I can do better. And Colonel Cudney said, well, you can either wait a year and go back to FA BOLIC, and meanwhile just sit on staff and not be rated, or you can go straight to Adjutant General School, BOLIC, and if you do well there, then we'll talk about, getting you back into the FA community with Triple C. So I went back this time with a lot more dedication and kind of pissed off to Adjutant General School. And I got Commandant's list there, came back, and then I was S1 for a couple years, which served me well later down the road when I became platoon leader in OPSO. But did really well in Adjutant General School, came back. Colonel Cudney was impressed. And then I spent a couple years as S1, and then at that point, it was the decision point for Triple C. And so I go and talk to Colonel Troche at the time with an interest to join the cyber team. And he talked me into it, and I thought it was a great pivot with the importance of the field and the technical skill sets the Army teaches you. And then, so at that point, I went and talked to Colonel Nazardine, who was my battalion commander at the time, and I expressed my interest in going cyber. And then Colonel Nazardine and I had about a 30-minute discussion, and he ended up convincing me to change my mind and go field artillery. Well, that 30-minute discussion ended up changing my career completely. So basically the bottom line here is, I had some extreme examples of failure, but then I ended up continuing down the field artillery road by learning from my mistakes, learning how to get better, and then turning those weaknesses into strengths. Like I read incessantly in the field artillery community, and I try to be the best FA officer that I can be.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it goes hand in hand with what First Sergeant Phillips was saying is, we're not defined by this, and it's just kind of it may be a failure at the time, or it may feel like a failure at the time, but it really leads you down the path to where you want to be and where you can be successful. So I appreciate both of your, insights on that and sharing your stories of perceived failure. We're going to wrap this up here. So I'll just open it up if either of you want to give some advice to young leaders, up and coming commanders, up and coming first sergeants, or even really anybody out there of advice you would give about careers and about navigating this organization.
Well, I'll go ahead and kick that off real quick, ma'am. So some of the advice I could give to soldiers, period, NCOs and officers is, we talk mentorship. And I think the mentorship, it's not really a program or anything like that. I know people talk about it, ask if you have a mentor or anything like that. But really, mentorship has been one thing that has kind of been a lost art. It's starting to come back. It really is. I was lucky enough to have several mentors throughout my career. I had Sergeant Major Butts. I had Sergeant Major Spalding. I had Lieutenant Colonel Hunhoff. Had some really good NCOs and officers teach me and guide me through my career. And the one advice I would give is, you don't just have to mentor one soldier. Mentorship can happen in a group, in a formation, or just a conversation, talking, learning, getting to know your soldiers, their path, their career path, what they want to do. Maybe they're not happy in artillery, or maybe they're not happy in supply or cook or something like that. Learn that, tell them to go to a different branch and then maybe come back. But take an opportunity to mentor these soldiers. And if a soldier or an NCO is not coming to mentor you, find yourself one. The lower enlisted, go and find yourself an NCO that you look up to, or an officer that you look up to, and go and talk to them. And I guarantee it that they will take the time to mentor you. They'll see that. They'll see that you're interested. This is a two-way learning stream. And the biggest thing I've always said to my soldiers, officers, and everything like that, the one thing I always say is, the day that we as leaders stop teaching and learning is the day that we need to go to the couch. So that's all I got, man.
All right. And Captain Tierney, do you want to have some ending advice for any up and coming commanders out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So first is I would recommend to actively manage your career. So build your career tracker timeline and communicate that plan to your supervisor. If you do this well, you'll be available, and it will increase your chances to be able to serve in the next higher position. So key for me, if I wasn't able to engage with my battalion commander at the time, Colonel Nazardine, and show him what my career looked like, I would not be in this position where I was in command on the deployment and currently in command. So it's very critically important for you to actively manage your own career. Next is don't be afraid to make decisions. I mean, that's what you get paid to do as a leader. Hindsight's always 20/20. Because you always have all the information at that point in time. Know what your left and right limits are, what's the mission, what are the key tasks, and execute within those parameters. This is probably the most important thing that I've found success with is you have to read to lead. So learn from others' mistakes so you don't have to make them yourself. Some of the most successful leaders, both within the military community and the private sector, are voracious readers. And it's very important. That could be not only just reading regulations and your skill set and your craft, but reading outside of that too, reading business books. For me personally, I've found there's a lot of parallels between a successful business and successful Army units. And so I could take some of those lessons learned and apply it to Bravo battery currently. And then lastly, a plan usually doesn't survive that first contact, but planning and rehearsals, those things are going to enable you to adjust on the fly very quickly and be successful in your mission. So plan and rehearse as many contingencies as you can. So when you have to adjust on the fly, you are then ready.
Yeah, those are all great points. Thank you both for sharing, and thank you both for coming and sitting in with me on episode 4. Thanks for coming in and telling me some of the lessons you learned. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode with some great lessons. And I sure hope you learned something. If you're interested in sharing some of your lessons, email us in the public affairs office at wyogard@gmail.com or give us a call at 307-772-5040. If you like this episode or our previous episodes, tell your friends, tell your family, and of course, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.